Hi there. Upon reviewing my last video on Gnosticism, Kether, and the affirmation "Go, let go," I realised that that video was incredibly dark and pessimistic. And I'm usually such a jolly fella, and I write jolly music as well. Sort of quartet music and all sort of Regency style, which is terribly kind of refined and jolly and happy music, and some might say incredibly shallow. Uh, but anyway, so I normally jolly, but that video sort of came out really very dark indeed, which is quite interesting because Kether is in fact the abode of light. And there isn't any darkness in Kether. It's all light and niceness, and silky light white background and foreground. And indeed, it's supposed to be a reflection of the transcendental world to which Gnostics refer. But you would never believe it from my description, and what I take to the meaning of let go is supposed to be. So I don't know. I was caught in a bit of a self-contradiction there, really. A work in progress? I don't know. Anyway, it got me thinking about pessimism and optimism, and it got me thinking about, the old thing about a glass half empty and half full. So imagine we're sort of in our beer, we're comparing two beer gardens. One beer garden is the normal beer garden that we all know and love, and the other one is a transcendental beer garden which has yet to be experienced. And as I say, we all know about the empty glass and the full glass thing. You've got various statements. So the glass is half full. This is an expression of optimism. The glass is half empty. This is an expression of pessimism. The glass could be full, but it isn't. This is the expression of acceptance of the way things are. And the glass is at half capacity. This is an objective fact, an expression of objective fact, and it's just the way that we interpret the objective facts of the universe, either pessimistically or optimistically, or with acceptance or with non-acceptance. And we also realise, of course, that this being of the finite world, that it's possible to drink the bar dry, and for there to be no more beer. And the only beer that you see now is the half full glass of beer, and after that there ain't no more beer. And that's the fear, basically, of living in the finite worlds, that things are going to run out eventually, sooner or later. And so therefore, in the finite worlds, not only have you got optimism and pessimism, you've got several views competing with each other in the mind of an individual or community. And this is quite important, because if you have a pessimistic view of the world, you're going to be quite conservative, and if you have an optimistic view, some might say idealistic or airy-fairy view, you're going to be incredibly optimistic about everything. And so I think politics actually emerges from these two different views. If you're going to be accepting, you're sort of more, I suppose, politically on the right. And if you're sort of looking for objective facts, then sometimes you can be called left-wing by right-wingers. So there's a political dimension to these several views about the state of beer and the beer situation in the finite worlds. And so I thought about all this, and thinking about, the fact that I tend to be pessimistic. And if you're optimistic, then you're going to find my a pessimistic view of the beer situation to be rather, I don't know, rather disingenuous to the world, to the fact that there is abundance in the world. We just have to perceive it, and you're going to see that I'm a bit, I don't know, a bit lacking in spirituality even. I don't have much sort of vitality to my life, and I'm not joie de vie. I'm a bit sort of like a kind of like a Puritan, a grouchy old Puritan about it all. And you'll regret that, my lad, and it'll all end in tears. You'll watch, and I tend to have a very, very pessimistic view of the outcome of everything, and the beer will run out eventually. And if there's a catastrophic event happen, then there won't be any more beer brewed, and this will be the end of all beer in the universe, which is catastrophic thinking. Because that might not be the case at all. And somebody might start brewing beer somewhere in a post-apocalyptic world. And pretty soon we'd have our beer gardens back because there'd be a demand for beer and so never fear sort of thing. But at the moment, yes, the beer glass could be full, but it isn't. We just have to accept that fact. We have to accept a lot of things in this world and a lot of adversity, of course, which is part of the finite or the worlds of the demiurge. And the thing is that from the universe's point of view, and this is a sort of related thought I had, was that due to recycling and the fact that energy is not lost or gained, it just changes its form, the second law of thermodynamics. From the point of view of the universe, everything is being recycled. So there is effectively abundance, complete abundance in the universe. It may not be from where you're standing. From where you're standing, you might have lost the game. But from other people's standpoint, they might have gained. And so there's going to be like a sort of wheel, the endless wheel of recycling occurring, whereby some people gain and some people lose, and it just goes round and round. And for every door that closes, another will open. If not for you, for somebody else, or for somebody that you know or love or whatever. And we live vicariously through the success of celebrities, for example, for whom many doors have opened due to their fabulous wealth. But then a lot of them lose their fabulous wealth through drug abuse or through some sort of financial catastrophe, where they lose all their wealth and so on and so forth. Or COVID-19 destroys the movie industry or whatever. It looks like COVID-19 will destroy quite a few industries, in fact, before it's finished. In which case, a lot of people that were rich will be poor. And a lot of people who are poor won't be any poorer than they are now, so they won't be too upset really about it. Which is, the problem of being rich is that you can lose it all and then feel really bitter about the whole thing. So there is effective abundance overall. And if you look at the biggest picture or the bigger picture, then there is abundance in the universe. It just may not be where you are. So scarcity might be where you are, but scarcity is indeed a fact of life in the finite worlds. That's why they're called finite worlds, because they are finite. Wherever somebody is, they are experiencing scarcity, and other people are experiencing abundance. And in our society, we can't all be fabulously rich, for example. Otherwise there'd be no meritocracy, and there'd be no kind of trying to be better yourself through education and experience and through investment and whatever. And selling and things like that, and producing, for that matter. Don't forget, you have to be able to produce something if you want to sell it. You can't just sell something which doesn't exist, except if you're Donald Trump, of course, who's used to doing, because he's a salesman, he's used to napkin presentations, he's used to having nothing to sell, just the promise of something later. Which is how a lot of people sell things, obviously, especially stocks and shares and investment opportunities, so-called, and things like that. Compare this whole situation, which is dualistic as well, to boot, because you have a pessimistic view possible, and you have an optimistic view possible, and you have an objective view possible, and you have an accepting view possible. To compare this to the transcendental beer garden, where there is only one view of the beer situation, and that is that there is an endless amount of beer. And this changes the psychology of everything, because as you sip your beer, you'll notice that the beer comes back again. So no matter how much you drink, the beer glass is always full. It's like the magic porridge pot. Of Mabinogion, it continuously fills up, and because it's an infinite amount of everything, because infinite means exactly that. It means infinite amount of everything. All of the time. Well, there isn't any time anyway, but if there was, it would be, it would be an infinite amount of it. And so there's no running out of beer in this beer garden. I can tell you that. And this changes everything because, in fact, there are no views of the beer situation. There is no optimistic view. There is no pessimistic view. There is no accepting view, and there is one objective or metaphysical truism, is that you never run out of beer. That's a truism in this transcendental metaphysical realm, and that's the beer situation there. Now, this is an interesting point, though, that I kind of mulled over. I mean, as they're talking about resources, I mean, maybe the whole concept of resources or the reality of resources doesn't apply to the transcendental realm, because there's no need for anything. You've already reached bliss. Sit sat ananda, ananda is bliss. So you don't need to drink any beer to become blissful, or even to become just a little bit tipsy, because you already have all the joy that you need, and you don't need to drink beer in order to be jolly about life. It's all pretty jolly because it's all infinite bliss. So in fact, the whole concept of resources is sort of undermined by the concept of transcendentalism, you see. And so there's no need for anything either. So the beer wouldn't exist, I suppose. Really, I mean, you would exist as consciousness of soul, but you wouldn't need consciousness of beer to make life more interesting or better. But then a lot of people say, and I don't think this is a facetious thing to say, they would say, well, surely all the point of life, life is struggles of Nietzschean idea, is all taken away because, what does it mean to be human? To be human is to choose between optimism and pessimism, between objectivity and acceptance of what is, and a subjective evaluation of the situation, which is that the glass is half empty or half full, and I'm feeling happy about it being half full, or I'm feeling miserable about it being half empty. And even the possibility that the beer garden will run out of beer, and that the whole world will run out of beer due to some catastrophic intervention of nature. But this might be only a temporary situation, and the beer might come back, and the beer gardens might reopen, and all will be well again. And this is really what it means to be heaven. If it means to be a man or a woman in the infinite realms, you are at least being human. And if you take away the optimism, the pessimism, the acceptance, and the objectivity, what do you have left? You don't really have a human being left. Because we could be defined by the choices we make. We could be defined by the evaluations that we make on any situation and person, and indeed on ourselves. And without that, what's the point in being alive at all? What's the point of being conscious unless we have scarcity, injury, accident, adversity ahead of us, or in front of us, or obstacles in front of us? This is covered a lot in science fiction, that they have a perfect society and everybody's really fed up because there's nothing to struggle for or against, and without that struggle, without that sort of Nietzschean struggle, what's the point? You might as well not have anything to do at all. Which this sort of idea of transcendentalism, or the transcendental world, is indeed where there's only one view, which is that everything is infinite and infinitely abundant. So it's obvious, really. I don't think that. I think the idea of abundance and scarcity obviously belongs to a universe which is full of stuff, because that stuff, that energy, can either be in abundance or in scarcity. You can either have it or not have it. Your neighbour can have it and not you, and vice versa. So, that being so, the whole edifice of duality, of saying abundance and scarcity, optimism, pessimism, objectivity, subjectivity, acceptance, non-acceptance, it all just collapses. It implodes, and all you've got left is this infinite kind of humming sound, which is your sit sat ananda, which is basically you experience the infinite in a completely different way to how we experience the finite. And that must be the metaphysical truism. So, in fact, this this metaphysical beer garden, actually, by definition, cannot exist. And a lot of people will say, well, it sounds like hell rather than heaven. To be perfectly honest with you, I'm rather keen on my beer gardens, and I like drinking my beer. And I like thinking that there will be beer tomorrow, if not beer today. And I like thinking about the beer that I had yesterday, which is what the sort of fond memories of an old person are. That they're remembering their marriage, or they're remembering their kids growing up, or they're remembering the good times that they had. And kind of forgetting the bad times that they had, because overall, they're alive now to remember the good times that they had during their life. So the beer that you had yesterday, you kind of think, well, that was a great party, or that was a great time I had in Spain, all right, with all the beer that I drank on that particular holiday, and it might give you a sort of rosy glow in your dotage, to be able to think about the beer that you have drunk, and the women that you have made love to, or the men that you've made love to, whilst you were drunk. So, but I think really the idea, it must be that the concept of infinite abundance and transcendentalism must really be about how it impacts on our lives now in the infinite world. So we have a vision, or an idea about transcendence, when basically we don't have any idea about it at all. We can't possibly know anything about transcendence and how it is experienced and in what ways. But the fact that we have an idea about what we think transcendence means, that is infinite abundance and infinite resources, that this impacts on our lives, because I suppose we come back to kind of an accepting way of thinking, which is that the glass could be full, but it isn't, for whatever reason, and maybe it will be in the future, or maybe it has been in the past. So basically, we've still got beer and beer gardens, but because we've kind of have a transcendental view of beer, we don't really sort of worry about the beer situation. We don't sort of say it's not fair that the person at the other table has more beer than me, for example, and I'm going to go and get that beer often, which would be an unethical thing to do. So the transcendental view of beer and beer gardens has an impact on the way that we behave in a beer garden, so that we don't make it a bear garden. I had to put that in. Anyway, so, and it could be that this view of what is going to come after we've died, in heaven, in the heavenly realms of infinite beer, it's really neither here nor there whether it actually exists, and we can take an agnostic view of whether it actually exists. It's basically how the story of a transcendental beer garden and an infinite amount of beer impacts on the way that we think about beer and beer gardens now, in this world, in our lives now, in the immanent worlds of the demiurge, the scarcity worlds of the demiurge. So overall, you see, there's no need to be so pessimistic, and come back to my original my first video that I ever did, why don't Gnostics commit suicide in the face of what they believe? Why don't all their devotees just commit mass suicide to get away from this terrible place? So obviously, that would be a limited view of the situation. And the thought of a transcendentalism actually has or should have a positive view on how we live in this world right now. And I mention this because there's a game called We Happy Few, and in one of the scenarios, spoiler alert, I suppose, there was this cult that they all want to commit mass suicide, right? And you've got to stop them doing it. And the preacher, this mad preacher, he says that there's going to be like this UFO comes and collects us all, and we've got to kill ourselves and take this poison. And after they've taken this poison together in this cult room, a cult temple, we're all going to ascend together and jump on this UFO. It's going to take us to different space and time and a better place altogether. So that would be kind of like a dysfunctional view that you have cobbled together as a result of being exposed to Gnosticism. But it's not the true one. The true one is more functional than that. It's really saying, well, we don't really care about whether things are going to be better in the transcendental world, because it's simply, well, the thought that things could be better and could be infinitely abundant actually makes us more optimistic about this world, more accepting about this world. So at the very least, people becoming more accepting of their situation, rather than kicking against the pricks, as they call it, and being frustrated and angry about scarcity and about loss. And these things, scarcity and loss, are just it's just a turn of the wheel, isn't it? Like but it's always the thought, and Wiccans have this, that the wheel turns, and winter turns to spring, and spring turns to summer. But then summer turns to fall, and fall turns to winter. But the transcendental non-dualistic view of existence, which points to a future where there is no wheel and there is no turning of the wheel, whether or not that is actually the situation, I think enables us to accept the turning of the wheel better. And that's possibly where Gnosticism can have a positive psychological effect on its adherents, rather than a negative effect. But granted, there is a possibility, of somebody getting hold of all these Gnostic ideas and simply committing suicide, for the various reasons that I presented in my video on Gnosticism, Keter, and Let Go. But I think what I really meant to say in that video is let go of the negative feelings that arise from being in this negative situation. That we don't have to look at the whole situation of being in this world as a negative one. It could be that ironically it points us in a positive direction, or gives us a bit of a psychological lift, but due to the realization, I think, that we're bound to think dualistically. We're bound to complain when we've lost something, and we're bound to celebrate when we've gained something. We have this reactive mind, as the Buddhists say, and it's just going to be there, whatever, because that's how we're sort of hardwired to complain and celebrate at the same time. And the thing to do is not to get too reactive. That's the first thing. But second thing, also to lose all sense of self, and thereby not go into a non-reactive state of consciousness, whereby, sometimes we can take a holiday from our reactive selves, and we can take a holiday from dualistic thinking or dualistic reacting, as it might be called, and enter into this infinite transcendental beer garden, where there's no need to be hung up on loss and gain, or empty or full, and that we have a concept of fullness, as it were, which transcends the concept of fullness plus scarcity plus emptiness, if you see what I mean. So you kind of have, like, the idea of scarcity and fullness as a dualistic pair, a binary pair of concepts, and then you transcend that binary pair of concepts to something which is called infinite abundance, which is another category of thought. And this may or may not exist in reality, but you don't really care about that, because you are quite happy to see the world through a microscope and a telescope, as it were, at the same time, and basically to see something utterly different to what people normally see. And that's pretty good. That's probably the best we're ever going to get out of Gnosticism, out of non-dualistic thinking, and that's kind of should fill you with hope, really, that if you cultivate non-dualistic thinking, there is a possibility of a better life, not the best life that could possibly be, but certainly a better life than the one that perhaps you're experiencing now. And that's a sort of more jolly kind of a jolly kind of thought to fit my more jolly kind of character when I'm feeling jolly.